At the beginning of the story, we see a man named Frank, who was standing outside his house smoking a cigarette. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. There was a beautiful glow in the sky, something people usually call the northern lights. Such lights are normally seen around the North Pole, but somehow that night, they were visible from New York City. Still, Frank didn't pay much attention to it. He had a big radio that he used to talk to random strangers. But that night, when he turned it on, he ended up talking to his own son, who claimed to be 36 years old. Somehow, the radio had caught a signal from 30 years in the future. His son told him, "Dad, save yourself. You're going to die today." Frank froze after hearing this. To understand what was happening, we need to know Frank a little better. He was a firefighter whose bravery was known throughout the city. Just 2 hours earlier, a tanker filled with petrol had crashed. The tanker flipped over a sewer where 2 electricians were working. Petrol was dripping down, and just one spark could have caused a huge explosion. The firefighters arrived there, and Frank was with them. He risked his life and saved both electricians just moments before the blast. People admired his courage. Many women were attracted to him. But Frank loved only 2 people in this world, his wife Julia and his son John. Julia was a hospital nurse who treated her patients like her own family. The story returns to the point where it started, the night when the sky was glowing. 30 years after Frank's encounter, the sky lit up again in exactly the same way. Now John's son, 36-year-old John, had become a police detective. He was an expert at catching criminals, but a bit lost in his personal life. His girlfriend had left him because he was still stuck in his past trauma. 30 years ago, on that same night, his father had died. John was just 6 years old. Frank had gone to put out a fire in a warehouse, but only his burnt body returned. That day, John lost everything. Even 36 years later, he still carried that pain. His house was filled with memories of his father, old photos, baseball trophies, and the same table where Frank used to operate the radio. When John returned home after meeting his mother Julia, he found his childhood friend Gordo there with his son. While playing, Gordo's son found Frank's old radio. Seeing it brought back memories for John. Later, Gordo left with his son. The radio was still on, and John started watching TV. Suddenly, he heard a voice from the radio. "CQ-15. CQ-15, come in. Is anyone listening?" John went closer and replied, "Hello, I'm calling from New York City. My name is John. Who are you?" The other man said he thought the radio could reach China or Japan, but instead he found someone from his own city. He asked John about the baseball match happening the next day, an extremely famous one. John was shocked because the match he was talking about happened 30 years ago. John said, "Are you joking? Why would I watch a match that happened 30 years ago?" There was silence, and then John heard something strange. The man on the radio called someone Little Chief. John's heart dropped. That was the name his father used to call him when he was a kid. John asked, "What's your name?" The reply came, "Frank. Frank Sullivan." John's face turned pale. He thought this must be some prank by Gordo. He yelled, "Gordo, this is a terrible joke. I'll deal with you tomorrow." But the voice said, "Gordo, my neighbor's boy, do I sound like a child to you? I'm really Frank Sullivan. If you know my neighbor, then who are you?" John replied, "Stop it. Frank Sullivan is my father's name. He died 30 years ago. I'm his son, John Sullivan, speaking from his house in Queens, New York." Silence fell. The camera showed Frank, and John was shocked. It was really him. His father, alive, 30 years in the past. Both were struggling to believe this miracle. At that moment, Frank accidentally dropped his cigarette on the wooden table, burning it slightly. He immediately put the fire out. At the same time, 30 years in the future, John was sitting at the same table. A burn mark suddenly appeared on it. Seeing this, John realized it was all real. He said, "You just burned the table, right? I can see the mark." Frank felt like someone was standing right next to him, making fun of him. Angry and scared, he shouted, "Who are you? Stay away from my family, or I'll break your bones." John replied, "For that, Dad, you'd have to stay alive." Then he told him, "You're going to die tomorrow morning in a warehouse fire. Don't use the window exit. Use the other exit." Frank turned off the radio, still thinking it was nonsense. The next morning, when Frank reached the station, he learned that a warehouse was actually on fire. Now he started believing the radio guy. At the site, a woman came crying, saying her daughter was trapped inside. Frank hesitated for a moment, afraid he might die today. But he didn't back away from duty. He rushed inside, found the girl unconscious, and carried her up to the window where the ladder was supposed to reach, but the mechanism failed. Then he remembered John's warning and took the ventilator route instead, escaping safely. 30 years later, John was sitting in a bar with Gordo and police officer Satch, Frank's old friend. They were talking about Frank's death. John still believed the radio incident was a dream. But suddenly, new memories formed in his mind. Memories of him with his father, going to school together, playing together, as if Frank had never died. His glass slipped from his hand. He whispered, "My father didn't die in that fire." Gordo and Satch said, "We know. He died of cancer 10 years ago." John smiled. He finally understood. He had truly spoken to his father, and Frank had listened. That's why he survived the fire. But a sad truth hit him. Frank was a chain smoker. One cigarette after another. This habit later gave him cancer. In the past, Frank had saved the girl and realized a huge explosion had occurred exactly where he had been standing earlier. If he had remained there, he would have died. Now Frank fully believed that the radio voice was really his future son. He went home and tried to contact John again, but there was no signal. Meanwhile, in the future, John returned home happy and suddenly noticed all the photos had changed. In the newspaper clipping, where earlier was written that Frank had died, it now said that the firefighters saved the girl. On the table, something else was written, "I am alive, Chief." Seeing this, John's eyes filled with tears. Both father and son connected again through the radio and talked for a long time. John told his father about the future, who would win that year's baseball championship, when he bought his favorite car, everything. And finally, he told him, "Dad, you will die from cancer because of chain smoking. Please quit smoking." Hearing this, Frank became emotional. Back in the past, Frank went to the hospital to meet his wife, Julia. She was treating a patient. She asked her junior to handle the case and walked toward Frank. He looked happy, as if he had been gifted a second life. While they were talking, Julia noticed that her junior was about to give the wrong medicine. She rushed and stopped him, saving the patient's life. Frank expressed his love for her and went home. Meanwhile, older John was sleeping when he suddenly saw a strange dream. In that dream, someone from their family had died, and the funeral was taking place. Little John was sitting in a corner, scared and crying. Then he saw his mother's locket. Seeing that, John woke up suddenly, covered in sweat. But the strangest part was that he didn't forget the dream. Every face, every moment stayed crystal clear in his mind, as if it wasn't a dream, but a memory. Panicking, John called his mother, but a strange woman answered the phone. He tried again, but the same thing happened. John thought the network might be acting weird. Then he got ready to meet his girlfriend Samantha. Now that his father was alive, a huge weight had lifted off his heart. He wanted to apologize to her. But when he saw Samantha, she didn't recognize him at all, as if they had never met. John was left speechless. He assumed she was just angry and went back to the police station for work. But things felt even stranger there. His chief, Satch, who used to treat him like a friend, was suddenly behaving harshly toward him. Satch handed John a case file. They had been working on this case for a few days. A few days earlier, they had found a skeleton at a construction site. Satch told him it belonged to a nurse named Mary Finley, the first victim of a serial killer called Nightingale. This killer used to hunt only nurses 30 years ago, and the police could never identify him. Satch said with shock, "What a tragedy. 10 women were murdered 30 years ago, and we still couldn't catch him." John was stunned. According to the original timeline he remembered, the Nightingale killer had murdered only 3 nurses before disappearing. When John checked the Nightingale case file again, his world turned upside down. His mother Julia's name was on the victim list. Realizing this, John panicked. He rushed home and found that his mother had disappeared from all the family photos. He understood the horrifying truth. The changes he had made in the past to save his father had completely altered the present. John immediately turned on the radio and contacted his father again. He explained how the timeline had changed and how big the consequences were. He told Frank that the serial killer Nightingale would murder Julia, Frank's wife, and John's mother. Frank was shocked. "What are you saying? When will this happen? Tell me quickly." John replied, On the night of October 22nd, 1 week from your time, John asked, "Dad, did anything unusual happen at the hospital yesterday?" Frank thought for a moment and said, "I went to see your mom yesterday. I was so happy after surviving the fire." Hearing this, John understood everything. Something had happened at the hospital that shouldn't have happened. That's what changed the entire timeline. Frank said, "Don't worry, John. If you're sure Nightingale will target Julia on October 22nd, I won't let it happen. Not even his shadow will reach her." But John replied, "Dad, even if we save Mom, think about the innocent women he killed before and after her. All because the timeline changed because of us. Can we let them die?" They knew exactly which woman would be Nightingale's next target, but Frank didn't know what to do. He asked, "Should I go to the police and tell them the killer will attack that woman that day? They'll laugh at me." John said, "Dad, this is your job. You must follow that woman and observe who the killer is. Once we identify him, the police will be able to catch him." Frank agreed, though he was scared. He went to the bar where the next murder was supposed to happen. The target was a nurse named Carrie, who would arrive with her friends. According to the records, Carrie would leave the bar at 7:30 p.m., and her body would be found behind the bar at 8 p.m., meaning the attack would happen between 7:30 and 8. John warned, "Dad, once Carrie walks out of the bar, keep an eye on anyone who follows her. Call the police immediately." Frank was sitting inside when Carrie walked in. She recognized him as the brave firefighter who had saved the girl. She and her friends were impressed and talked to him for hours. Frank didn't notice that the Nightingale killer was silently watching him the whole time. The killer was actually the same man who had been Julia's patient at the hospital. Everything now made sense. If John had not interfered with the past, Frank would have died in the fire. Julia would have rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news, and her junior would have mistakenly given the wrong medicine, killing Nightingale right there. His story would have ended. But now, since Frank survived, Julia never left the hospital, and she stopped the junior from making the mistake, which saved Nightingale's life. This changed the entire future. Frank had unintentionally ruined Nightingale's plan that night. Because of this, Carrie didn't get murdered, and her case file vanished from the police records in the future. John was happy, but they still didn't know who the killer was. John then told Frank that the next target was a nurse named Cece Clark, who worked nights at a nightclub. The killer would strike between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Frank went there early and waited. As the bar closed, Cece went upstairs to change. Frank went to the restroom and kept watch. Suddenly, someone attacked him. It was Nightingale. Frank fought back, but the killer knocked him unconscious. He then stole Frank's wallet, took his driver's license, and fled. When Frank regained consciousness, he rushed upstairs, but it was too late. Cece had been murdered. Terrified, Frank went home and told John what happened. The killer had his driver's license. Things were getting worse. They still didn't know who Nightingale was, but now the killer knew everything about Frank. He could easily reach Julia and little John. Frank was scared, but John encouraged him. Then suddenly, John said, "Dad, if Nightingale touched your wallet, his fingerprints must be on it. Now listen carefully. Hide your wallet somewhere safe. A place where no one will find it for the next 30 years. And Frank did exactly that. She sealed her purse inside a packet and carefully hid it inside an old wooden box near the window of their house. Then, 30 years later, adult John opened that same box, and the purse was still there, safe and untouched. John happily told Frank on the radio, "Dad, don't worry. I'll find out who Nightingale really is." John immediately took the wallet to the police station for fingerprint analysis, but the results shocked everyone. Nightingale wasn't a normal man. He was a retired police officer named Jack Shepard. John tracked down Jack, who was still alive and living a respectable life. Hiding all suspicion, John spoke to him and tried to gather all possible information about the Nightingale murders. Then John went home and contacted Frank again through the radio. He told him, "Dad, Nightingale's real name is Jack Shepard. He was a police officer. Call the FBI from public phone and tell them Jack is a serial killer who murdered all those nurses. And after each murder, he kept something from the victims, like a locket or jewelry." John hoped that when the FBI raided Jack's house, they would find all the evidence and arrest him forever. But fate had other plans. Before Frank could act, the police chief, Satch, reached his house. When Frank had gone to save Sissy, some neighbors saw him there. And worst of all, Jack had placed Frank's driving license next to Sissy's dead body. Satch now believed Frank was the killer, the real Nightingale. Satch arrested Frank and took him to the station. During the struggle, Frank's radio fell to the ground and broke. At the same moment, the radio in the present also went silent. Both father and son lost their connection. Frank was now under arrest, facing harsh interrogation. He tried to convince Satch that he had been talking to his son from the future through the radio, and that John told him Jack Shepard was the real killer. But Satch didn't believe a word. He thought Frank was making up stories to save himself. Frank tried everything, even telling him the exact baseball match results that John had told him from the future. Still, Satch refused to listen. Meanwhile, Julia reached the police station to meet Frank, but Satch took her to a cafe and told her that her husband was a serial killer. Julia broke down completely. Then, Satch noticed the baseball match playing on the cafe's TV. Everything was happening exactly as Frank had predicted. Now Satch was shocked. He realized Frank had been telling the truth somehow. At that very moment, Jack entered the custody area. Since he was a former officer, he used his authority to walk right in. He pulled out a gun to kill Frank on the spot. But just then, another officer entered the room. Jack pretended to act normal and left with him casually. Frank panicked. He knew Jack would return. His eyes fell on an electric wire. He connected the wire to the iron bars of his cell door and waited. Back in the cafe, Satch suddenly believed Frank and rushed to the station. In the station, Jack returned to Frank's cell to kill him. But as soon as he touched the iron door, he received a massive electric shock and collapsed unconscious. Frank searched Jack's pockets and found his address on his license. He then set off the fire alarm, flooding the area, and escaped in the chaos. Frank was now determined to prove his innocence and expose Jack. He went to Jack's house and searched for items connecting him to the murders, and he found everything. But Jack returned home. Frank escaped, and Jack chased him, firing shots. Their chase reached the port. Frank hid under the dock and suddenly pulled Jack into the water. Using a screwdriver, he killed Jack. Soon, Frank climbed out of the water. Satch and his team arrived moments later. They found all the evidence in Jack's house that proved Jack was the real killer. Satch recorded Frank's statement, sent divers to recover Jack's body, and cleared Frank's name completely. Frank returned home, peacefully sat down, and started repairing his radio. He saw a packet of cigarettes on the table, picked it up, and threw in the trash. He decided, I'm not going to die of cancer. I won't leave Julia and John alone. He switched on the radio again. The connection returned. Frank said, Everything's okay, son. Jack Shepard is dead. But in the present, John saw that nothing had changed. His mother was still missing from the family photo. John was talking to Frank when suddenly someone punched him and he fell to the ground. It was none other than the present-day Jack, still alive. At the same moment in the past, young Jack attacked Frank too. He knocked Frank unconscious and went straight to Julia's room to kill her. But little John entered the room. Jack got distracted, and Julia attacked him, scratching his face. Those same scratches instantly appeared on the face of the older Jack in the present. Jack punched Julia unconscious and carried little John away. When he came downstairs, he saw Frank standing there with a gun. Jack pushed little John forward and warned, Put the gun down or I'll snap his neck. Frank had no choice but to lower the gun. Now the lives of Frank, Julia, and little John were in danger in the past. And in the present, older Jack held a gun to adult John's head, just when Jack was about to shoot John in one bullet. In the past, Julia attacked Jack from behind. Frank quickly picked up the gun. Jack shoved Julia aside and lunged at Frank. Frank fired. The bullet tore Jack's hand off. And at that same moment, the present-day Jack's hand also disappeared. He had lost it 30 years earlier. With that, Frank, Julia, and little John were finally safe. Suddenly, everything in the present began changing. The house, the walls, the photos, everything rewrote itself. But the danger wasn't completely gone. Present-day Jack still had a gun. He aimed at John, but before he could fire, someone else shot him. Jack fell dead forever. The person who shot him was none other than Frank, alive in the present. John's father had survived and was still with them. Julia was alive too, and John's girlfriend Sam had returned to his life. At first as a stranger, but later, they got married and had a beautiful son. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one.